When a relationship hits a rocky patch and communication turns toxic, things can feel pretty desperate. You might start to question if there's maybe something deeper going on with your partner. And as you search for answers, you might notice that their traits align with narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. And then you can start to ask yourself, is my partner a narcissist? So in this video, I'm going to break down why diagnosing your partner with narcissistic personality disorder can be dangerous and why it may end up causing more damage to your relationship. So in the last decade or so, narcissism has become a hot topic on sites like YouTube and TikTok. There's warnings of narcissistic abuse in marriages, manipulation from narcissistic spouses, and talk about toxic narcissistic behaviors from partners have spread like wildfire to get easy clicks from people looking for an explanation from the breakdown of their relationship. So let's first understand what narcissistic personality disorder is before we break down why diagnosing someone with it is so dangerous. So for those who don't know, narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosable mental condition where a person has an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. People with NPD often have a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to the slightest criticism, and they may come across as arrogant, entitled, and manipulative. And often relationships with NPD can be strained because the person with NPD can struggle to recognize or care about the feelings and needs of others. So from this definition, if your relationship is currently strained or damaged, or maybe even separated or on the verge of divorce, it can be easy to recognize these traits in your partner. The problem is that there are a lot of myths around narcissism that can cause people to feel worried about being in a relationship with someone with narcissism. So the first main myth is that narcissists are always dangerous and controlling. So some narcissists are dangerous and controlling, but most are not. Just like some non-narcissists can be dangerous and controlling, many are not. Narcissism exists on a scale, and believe it or not, everyone is on that scale. Healthy individuals, such as yourself, can and do display narcissistic traits sometimes, while at the other end of the scale, someone might display all of them all the time. So it's ultimately on a sliding scale. The second myth is that narcissists cannot change. So there's this common idea that narcissists cannot change. The truth is that narcissists who do get help actually show a high remission rate. So there's actually a lot of studies that indicate with proper treatment, many individuals with narcissism can make significant improvements. The third myth is that narcissists are incapable of love or healthy relationships. So narcissists actually are fully capable of love and healthy relationships. Many can and do have very healthy relationships. So while it's important to understand that while a diagnosed narcissist approach to relationships might be challenging, with the right support, action, and therapy, there are many, many positive changes that can occur. However, the problem is that self-diagnosing your partner with narcissism can and does often cause more damage to the relationship. So I want to break down why that is. So the first reason why diagnosing your partner as a narcissist is dangerous is that you are not a doctor. You know, the term textbook narcissist is thrown around a lot. And despite the fact that it may feel like your partner has NPD, it actually takes 10 plus years of medical training. And then from that, it takes multiple tests to formally diagnose someone with NPD. And even then, there are many, many misdiagnoses, as some traits can actually have a crossover with ADHD, like, for example, I have ADHD, or bipolar, borderline personality disorder, or more often than not, narcissistic traits can even be situational. They can be environmental to a specific time in someone's life. Like I mentioned before, narcissism is on a spectrum, ranging from some traits some of the time, which is every single person on this planet, all the way to all of the traits all of the time. And even then, that would take a qualified person to make an actual diagnosis of someone with narcissistic personality disorder. So every single person on this planet exhibits narcissistic traits at times, especially during times of intense stress, such as work, personal life, or especially a struggling relationship. Whether it's on the brink of separation or divorce, this is where narcissistic traits in any partner can start to exaggerate and become a lot more prominent. And just because somebody is exhibiting narcissistic behaviors does not mean that they are a narcissist. And that brings me on to my next point. You know, when it comes to couples, especially in like couples counseling, there is often a misdiagnosis from one partner or both partners of narcissism. So for example, many of my relationship coaching members were convinced that their partners were narcissists, only to see their behavior change. You know, a friend of mine is a marriage counselor, and they told me that when people approach them, narcissism or NPD is mentioned in about 80% of cases, despite the fact that it's not actually aligning with the actual statistics. So there are less than 200,000 people a year who are diagnosed with narcissism, which is only about 0.5% of the population. So when 80% of couples counselors hear that people think they're married to somebody who's a narcissist, it actually is much, much more likely that you're seeing things through your own biases. One thing that a doctor once told me is that if you hear hoofbeats behind you, assume it's horses, not zebras. So if you are looking for a narcissist, it doesn't mean that you are married to a narcissist or you are in a relationship with a narcissist. So think again about the behaviors that you're seeing. Thinking you're important, wanting to be around successful people, dreaming about being more successful, wanting admiration from others, feeling entitled sometimes, putting your feelings above others. These are things that every single person on this planet has done at some point in their life, when they felt needy, when they felt unsafe, when they felt worried. These are behaviors that we have all done. I have done it. I know every single person around me has done it. People I love who are definitely not narcissists have done it. So it can be really easy to fall for your own confirmation bias at this point. When you're feeling hurt and you're feeling worried and you're looking for narcissistic behaviors and suddenly you start to see them everywhere. And this is perfectly normal, but it's important to start recognizing what is your own bias and separating it from what is factual rather than your own feelings or worries. So just before I jump into the next point, if you do want more videos on relationships, then feel free to subscribe to the channel for new videos every single week. And one of the main reasons why it's so dangerous to diagnose your partner with narcissism is that you start to treat your partner as if they are the source of all of the problems in your relationship. Blaming your partner for all of the problems in the relationship really disempowers you. When you treat them as if they can't change and they have a fundamental problem within themselves, this actually creates more toxicity. Internally blaming someone for all of the problems in your relationships makes you treat them with resentment. And then when they feel the resentment coming from you, they start to react defensively. And this actually brings out more narcissistic behaviors out of somebody else. And this is exactly what would happen to you. If I spoke to you one-on-one and I really resented you, everything that I say to you, you would start to feel defensive because you would feel the resentment coming from me. And then you would start to act defensive and you would start to display narcissistic behaviors within yourself because you are feeling worried and you start to prioritize your own feelings, right? So when people feel resentment, this actually reinforces their need for narcissistic behaviors. And this within a relationship can create a toxic cycle, which then starts to become a feedback loop. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until one person breaks that feedback loop. Internally believing that your partner can't be helped becomes another issue. If you think about it, less than 1% of the population has narcissistic personality disorder. And of that 1%, 84% don't actively seek help. However, 52% of those who do seek help show signs of remission within 2 years. If you think about it, the likelihood of you being in a relationship with a diagnosable narcissist who is never going to seek help and who is beyond help is actually such a minute possibility. And if you think about it this way, you are treating your partner like they are going to be this small percentage of a statistic. If you think about if your partner thought that of you, how you would feel. You would feel kind of hopeless in the relationship and you would feel very defensive. You would feel horrible. You would think, wow, this person that I thought at some point understood me and loved me, they think that I am beyond help, and you would feel really unsafe. You would feel very defensive and you wouldn't want to really open up and you wouldn't want to share with them. So think about the impact that your behavior and your internal interpretation of things has such a massive impact. Because what this leads to is that you start treating them as your diagnosis, not even as a actual official diagnosis, not a professional's diagnosis, but your diagnosis. So there's actually a bias that people have, which is called the actor-observer bias, where we see situational factors in our own behavior. So whenever we act out, we act with narcissistic behaviors, we excuse it because of the environment around us. We say, well, the reason why I'm doing that is because of this, because the way this person's acting. And we give ourselves the excuse that we have a right to act like that because of our situation. So in that situation, this is where we become the actor. We understand our role. However, with the actor-observer bias, we attribute others' behavior to their character. And this is where we're becoming the observer. So what this means is that we give ourselves the excuse, but when we look at our partner and we look at their behaviors, we say, well, they're a narcissist. That's why they're acting with narcissistic behaviors, is because they are a narcissist. And this is a bias that we can view the world in. And it's important to recognize that, because if we don't recognize that, then we're just going to be convinced that our partner is this diagnosis that we have completely created ourselves. So if your relationship is in a bad place and communication is broken down, you might interpret your partner's reactions through the lens of narcissism. You think of them as a narcissist, you think their character is a narcissist, and you start to treat them as a narcissist. You start to treat them as somebody who you think cannot change. You start to treat them as somebody who is beyond help. You start to treat them as dangerous. You start to treat them as manipulative. And if you think about it, this behavior in itself is actually lacking empathy for your partner, because you're not putting yourself into their shoes and thinking about how the situation might be affecting them, how they may be feeling. So this in itself is kind of a narcissistic behavior, because it overlooks the situational factors such as the stress in the marriage itself or the other factors that are going on around. These behaviors themselves can have many, many, many other explanations. They might be feeling hurt, scared, unsafe. There may be a lot of pressure on them to act in a certain way. If you have called them a narcissist before, they may be responding to that and being worried that they're seen as a narcissist and feeling even more defensive. Like I said before, if you hear a clip clopping behind you, it's more likely to be a horse than it is to be a zebra. So if someone is displaying narcissistic behaviors, it's more likely that they're actually just feeling unsafe rather than being an actual narcissist. Because at the end of the day, the problems in the relationship are the problems in the relationship. And many of my relationship members that I've worked with have broken through toxic behaviors by changing the way that they approach the problem. And obviously there's only so much detail that I can dive into in a YouTube video. So if you do want a deeper dive, then join us on the free relationship bootcamp, where you'll learn the skills and tools to build yourself a thriving relationship. Click on the link in the description to get started. Think of it this way. If there's a teammate struggling, blaming them, labeling them, and leaving them to struggle, it won't actually help the team. Remember, diagnosing your partner as a narcissist can push all of the responsibility for the relationship problems onto them. And this can blind you to what you can actually do to help the relationship. This actually puts a blockage on the relationship. If your partner is acting with narcissistic behaviors right now, your response is really crucial because it has the biggest impact on their behavior. Even when they are acting in toxic ways, it's coming from a place of hurt. So that leaves the question, what can you do? It's important to avoid punishing your partner for their behavior. Doing this feels like a natural thing to do. You want to give some sort of consequence and hold them accountable for their behavior. But a punitive approach, punishing like a child, actually creates resentment and further conflict. Your behavior actually creates and generates more toxic behavior. If you think about it this way, when was the last time somebody shouted at you and you wanted to do the thing that they said? Never, right? Because it makes you feel like you're a child. It makes you feel like you're being controlled. So if you punish your partner's behavior, it actually creates a lot more toxicity in the relationship, even though it can feel like it's the right thing to do. But just because it feels like it's the right thing to do doesn't mean that it is. So instead of punishment, use positive reinforcement. Encourage and reward positive behavior. When this is, for example, when they do open up and when they do express their feelings in a healthy way, reward that. Be there, be present. Reward them for expressing themselves. Being constructive with feedback and approaching it from the position of a teammate in the relationship rather than an individual. This means that you don't have to criticize them. You can actually just simply encourage the good behavior. And this is positive reinforcement. And you can help your partner understand the consequences of their actions without actually imposing punishment for them. So you can hold them accountable in a non-toxic way. So you can let them express themselves, manage your own emotions, even if they are expressing themselves in a toxic way. And then once you address their feelings and being able to be there and empathize and understand and show them that you understand, then at the end, you can say to your partner, hey, actually, do you mind if I say something to you? And, wait for them to give their consent because they may still be feeling quite emotional. And then you can say, hey, I can understand why you would feel that way or why you would feel so angry and upset with me. And you can validate their feelings. And then you can also say, when you do express things in that way, it actually leaves me feeling hurt, leaves me feeling a little bit uncared for. And I was just hoping that I could express that to you just so you know that, that's what I feel in those moments. And then ask them their thoughts. And this is a good way of being able to hold them accountable for their actions, but without doing it in a toxic way, without doing it in a way that's making them feel attacked. And this is leading by example. This is what's really important in relationships. If we expect our partner to have a certain behavior, we also need to lead by showing that behavior. And again, I'm not saying that this is easy because it's not, but it's important to do because this is the way to break this feedback loop. In this way, you actually encourage responsibility because what you're actually doing is you're showing to your partner, I can feel the things that you may be feeling, but here's the way that I handle them. and here's the way that I express them. And this is done in an implied way rather than telling them what they should do. And in this way, the more that they see positive responses from you and the way that you act, the more that you influence their behavior rather than telling them what to do. So this is encouraging responsibility. So holding your partner accountable means helping them understand their role in the relationship dynamics. So you're communicating with them what behaviors have an impact on your feelings, but you're doing it in a healthy way. You're not doing it in a punitive, punishing way. And it's important to be consistent in this. It's important to be able to manage your emotions and take responsibility for your own emotions and your own actions. In this way, you'll always be showing up and you'll always be leading by example. So be accountable for your own emotions and your own actions. So this is taking self-responsibility, taking responsibility for what you do and how you manage your emotions. And this is crucial for any healthy relationship. This involves self-reflection, regularly reflecting on your own behavior and its impact on the relationship and being realistic about it. Because at the end of the day, if you are calling your partner a narcissist and you're labeling them as a narcissist, whilst also displaying narcissistic behaviors yourself, then it becomes a double standard. And what you're actually doing is you're asking your partner to behave in a different way than what you do. So understand your own role and how much that has an impact on your partner, just like they have an impact on you. And make sure you're approaching things from a non-judgmental attitude. If we're labeling our partner as a narcissist, then ultimately what we're doing is we're sort of looking down on our partner and we're judging them in a way where we're not seeing them as an equal. So we don't treat them as an equal. And this constant judgment actually leads to your partner's defensiveness and distance, and it causes more of a discord, more of the emotional discord within the relationship. So take the time to understand, don't judge. Try to understand the reasons behind your partner's behaviors. Take the time to understand them and validate the way that they're feeling. Approaching your partner with kindness and compassion and being open-minded. And most importantly, don't expect change overnight. This is going to take patience and persistence, especially when there are regularly ingrained behaviors that we all have. This takes time. So have realistic expectations and understand that meaningful change is a gradual process. And the only way to have deep change is to be consistent with your own behavior and have the patience and trust that your partner will start to recognize their own behaviors and start to adjust them. Ultimately, relationships take a lot of work to cultivate, and especially to undo a toxic cycle that you can both be in. And conversations can get really heated, especially when there is a breakdown in communication. And if you do want a deeper dive into how to handle escalating conversations, then I will leave you with this video right here. I'll see you over there.